Hi everyone, this is Chris Chu from the Mindset Mastery and Change channel. In today's video, we will explore what HOV is all about. That's hierarchy of value. If you missed the first part of the interview, you can find the description, which I'll include right below. With that out of the way, let's explore what HOV is all about. Okay, I think that leads nicely to actually my second question, which is from the value science, the definition of value science. So you also mentioned that there's this thing called the universal hierarchy of value,
Yes.
or HOV in short. So can you tell us in simple terms, right, what that is?
Okay, so it, it's a great question. What is this thing called the hierarchy of value? And to really understand the hierarchy of value, we first need to define value. So it makes some sense to us and why there is actually a hierarchy to it. So in formal axiology, Dr. Hartman, the father of formal axiology, in his research and study in applying scientific mathematical methodology to the study of value, what he discovered is that value is determined by the complexity of attributes that something needs to fulfill its purpose or its definition. So you take anything like a chair, for example, just a plain old chair that like the one you're sitting in. It has a specific purpose. That purpose is to hold up a human body uh, with some level of stability about knee high, and it has a back on it so I can lean against it. And there's a certain finite number of attributes that something needs to fulfill the purpose or definition of a chair. Right?
Mm,
But something else might have much more complexity to it. And, oh, for example, an airplane has much more complexity to it. And an airplane uh, has a purpose of transporting a lot more people than one that would sit in a chair. And an airplane, therefore, has greater value. And I'm not talking about financial value, I mean its ability, it, well, its scientific measurement of value. There's a way to measure uh, value according to this objective approach. And so, in other words, the greater the complexity of something, the greater the value. But there's a problem with Dr. Hartman's definition. While it is scientifically true, I'll give you one other slight example here is the uh, the periodic table of elements in chemistry. Uh, the greater the number of protons and neutrons and electrons that an element has, the greater its mass. And that's why the periodic table is ordered the way that it is. And, and mass, given the laws of physics, mass starts to equate to how gravity impacts mass to give weight to something. And the more electrons and neutrons and protons that an element has, given a fixed amount of gravity, also not only the more mass but the more weight. And we human beings experience that weight in terms of uh, you know uh, helium doesn't weigh very much compared to lead, as an example. Okay,
mm,
so in similar fashion, we can apply a similar approach to understanding value from a formal mathematical standpoint. And in nature, we have this way of measuring value and identifying, as you'll see in a moment, the hierarchy of value. But how do we relate to that as human beings? Because we don't sit here and count the number of attributes something has in order to understand its value. There must be some other way as human beings that we can evaluate the value of something, which is really at the heart of what thinking is all about. When you think, what you're really doing is making evaluations, judgments of value, relative value, greater value, lesser value. We're attracted to things and we'll pursue things that we think have high value, but we'll resist and fight things that we think will take value away. And in between, we're just sort of apathetic about it. So, how do we human beings subjectively relate to value? And it turns out that there's a parallel definition and a way to understand value and to think about value, and that is that value is the degree to which something can enhance quality of life, to actually enhance quality of life. And let me give you some examples, 3 examples. We have a paper clip. What's the purpose of a paper clip? Well, it's simply to hold pieces of paper together, right?
Yep.
Then we have an automobile. Well, what's the purpose of an automobile? Well, it's to transport somebody safely and comfortably and economically from one point to another. Okay? And then in the middle, this represents a loving family. What's the definition? What's the purpose of a loving family? Well, it's sort of like, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. So let's count the attributes of a paperclip. What, 2 or 3? A little piece of metal about so big, twisted in a certain way with a certain amount of springiness that can hold pieces of paper together. That's the fundamental definition of a paperclip and its purpose. So it's pretty simple, particularly compared to the automobile, which is much more complex, but it still pales in comparison to the loving family, because a loving family has an infinite number of attributes, both in terms of its definition or its purpose. So we can see from a complexity of attributes that there's a hierarchy. The loving family has the most number of attributes, followed by the automobile, followed by the paperclip. But now let's look at it from a living axiology standpoint, a more practical, if you will, human perspective. Which one of these has the potential to create the greatest or add the most quality to life? Well, it's clearly the loving family, because that's intrinsic. That is who we are as human beings, and I emphasize loving the family. Clearly, there are many people around the world who are not in loving families, and so they spend a lot of time in their car. Then there's the car, which can transport that loving family on vacation, for example, or from one place to another, go out to a restaurant. But it can also take people to work. It can add a lot of value to life, and certainly much more than what a mere paperclip as a paperclip can add. So we start to see this hierarchy of value. And people wonder, well, wait a minute, isn't value totally subjective? Well, it is, but only in the human mind. It's a myth that it's only subjective. Dr. Hartman was able to prove that value is objective in nature, but purely subjective in the human mind. Like the example I gave of something can be really heavy to one person, but to another person, the same amount of weight, from a laws of physics standpoint and gravity, it can be the same 25 pounds or 25 kilograms, but to one person it feels heavy, and to the other person it feels very light or not so heavy. So we have this thing we call the axiological hierarchy of value, and it has to do with the complexity of items in its formal definition, but it also has to do with quality of life. And I won't go into great detail because, quite frankly, to apply axiology, we don't really need to know it. To apply axiology in the way that we do in Axiogenics and leadership development and coaching and in organization development, we don't really need to fully understand the hierarchy of value, but we are able to apply it in a certain way that we'll talk about. But one of the things that's really important to note is that the hierarchy of value validates, proves scientifically that people have the highest value. The intrinsic value of people rises above all else, including profitability, policies, rules, productivity. All of those things are valuable, but they pale in comparison to the infinite intrinsic value of human life and quality of life. In fact, the science proves that putting people first, the intrinsic value of human beings above all else, isn't just a nice management fad or a nice idea. It's a scientific fact. And in the 1960s, Dr. Hartman was able to prove that those organizations that actually put the intrinsic value of their people above all else will see, on average, 40% greater performance. 40%. It's not just a nice idea. It's a scientific fact. And the more that organizations can bring their actions, their ways of operating, and the more we as individual human beings can bring our own thinking and our actions into greater alignment with that hierarchy of value, the more value we create in our lives and through our actions and our choices, and the greater our quality of life, which includes performance and profitability, but also joy and happiness and intimacy and togetherness and innovation and agility and our ability to rise above things like pandemics and political warfare or even physical warfare and the differences that create all of that. We can rise above all of that if we just start to apply a valuegenic mindset and the hierarchy of value to navigate our way through the issues that we deal with as human beings, which we've done throughout human history, but we also have lost our way from time to time through just trial and error.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much, Peter, for that or that kind of the explanation about value and the hierarchy. So I can see that there is this systemic, which is at the lower end of the value spectrum, and then the intrinsic is at the high end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But let me ask this question because and kind of challenge you a little bit. And as you already mentioned that the human perception is subjective. So some people have argued that because of this fact, right, the perception of value is subjective. Each one of us, we value things differently, depending because on our beliefs, our experience, maybe our own upbringing. So with all these different interpretations by different people, how can there be one universal objective hierarchy of value? And I let me just maybe use an example to explain. For example, right, if I'm asked to rank two things, this thing called this maybe a speed limit and goal, right? So if I'm given two choices between speed limit and goal, how I rank it? I may rank, let's say, speed limit above goal because maybe I have my experience in the past where I believe that the speed limit there is very important because it can save people's lives. But goal, I may perceive as it's actually can actually make people greedy, right? And they ignore their family or their friends because of that. So for me, I may, because of my own experiences, I rank speed limit above goal. But another person might rate it differently. He might rate goal higher than the speed limit because he sees that he can use goal to help himself. He can use it maybe to help other people. But then the speed limit, he sees this as more like maybe just a rule, right? That some people may obey, they may not obey.
Something to control me. Right?
Yeah, so you have limited use. So through this example, they have, I mean, different people kind of interpret things differently. So how can this hierarchy of value, which is invented by Dr. Hartman, be the standard, right? Be the standard. How can his standard be the universal standard? That's the
right.
Yeah.
So, great question, and something you said, I just want to give a slight correction. Dr. Hartman didn't invent the hierarchy of value; he discovered it.
Okay.
Okay, just like Isaac Newton, common popular science would say, discovered gravity. Okay, or Galileo discovered that the Earth was round. The Earth was always round. Gravity always existed since there was an Earth. The scientists only discover how things work. They don't invent how things work.
Right.
You know, some would say God's the one that invented it. We just discovered it, that it exists. Okay? And that's it's a tough concept because as human beings we are completely subjective. You're absolutely right. One person will value the concept of a speed limit more than gold, and another person will value gold more than the speed limit. Okay, just as some person will evaluate brains over beauty, and another person will value beauty over brains. Okay, and that is the reality, but that's also the gift that's here, because just as the Wright brothers, or Einstein, or pick any scientist, discovered the objective reality, and because they discovered the objective reality, we were able to start to adjust how we subjectively operate in our world. We were able to achieve things that we had never achieved before. Okay? Mm-hmm. So Dr. Hartman didn't invent, he discovered that there is something called the hierarchy of value. Okay? But he also, what he did invent is an assessment instrument, a methodology that allows us to measure how you think, how you make value judgments, and then to be able to look at where is your judgments, your personal, subjective, habitual or hierarchy, personal hierarchy of value, where is it aligned with or not aligned with the universal hierarchy of value? And when we can identify where is there that alignment and where is there not that alignment, we are able to then start to understand when am I able to be at my best, and when is my thinking such that I'm not at my best. Okay? Think of A game versus B game. Okay? A game is aligned. A game is my best ways of thinking, my awesome ways of thinking. And my B game are those sort of biased, if you will, where we're giving too much or too little value to something in our subjective judgment. And because we're giving too much or too little, we are at risk of making mistakes, misjudging things, making mistakes, and missteps, misactions that in the end reduce our quality of life, limit or undermine our performance, our stress levels, the quality of our relationships, the level of our productivity, and the quality of our decision making. Right? We're able to identify where that is. And after working with tens of thousands of people over all these years, we know that when people engage their best ways of thinking, those ways of thinking that are naturally and already aligned with the hierarchy of value, that's when they're at their best. That's when they're in their A game. But when they allow their biases, their not so good ways of thinking, the ways of thinking that are out of alignment with the hierarchy of value, that is universally where they're not at their best. That's where we make mistakes. That's where we do stupid things, or that's where we interact with other people in ways that diminish trust and togetherness and communications and innovation and agility and resilience and just undermine both our individual and collective quality of life.